Hi, I'm Ashley from Sunny Made, and we are on week 6 of the Ultimate Beginner Quilt. Hello friends, welcome back. How are you doing? How is your beginner quilt coming along? Are you all caught up? Do you have any questions? If you do, make sure you leave them down in the comment section below or on the other videos, and I will come back and answer them. So let's review some of the things that we have gone over. In week 1, we talked about materials and supplies that you will need for this project. Week 2, I taught you how to cut out our squares and prep our fabric to get ready to sew them together and make a quilt top. Week 3, we talked about layout and how to sew together our rows. Week 4, we talked about ironing and sewing our rows together to create a finished quilt top. Week 5, last week, we talked about our quilt sandwich, what we need for backing and batting, and how to put our quilt sandwich together. And now that you have that, it is time to quilt it. So let's talk a little bit about terminology before we go any farther. When we put a quilt top together, it is called piecing. When we take it, our quilt sandwich with the backing, the batting, and the quilt top together, that is called, and we sew it together, all 3 pieces together, that is called quilting. So we are going to do a very basic straight stitch on our quilt. This is going to be super easy. You'll totally be able to do that. And we're going to do it on our home machine. So you don't need anything fancy. You don't need to make it look a particular way. So get your quilt sandwich. We need a long ruler. So if you have, I have one that's like 6 by 24 inches. I need a long ruler and some sort of marking pen. You can use, there's a couple of pens out there that are made specifically for quilting where you can come back and take them off your fabric, or you can just use something that doesn't actually write. It more like just puts a crease in your fabric so you know where you're going to sew. So gather up some materials and I will meet you at the table and we're going to go over quilting. Okay, I'm going to take a little break right here and say a few things. I actually went and filmed a part of this video and I started off with marking the first part of the quilt and then I sewed it. But as I was doing that, my thought was, I need to be able to show this a little bit better. So I'm actually going to show you it in a different way. And so some of the markings, some of the quilting is already going to be on the quilt. So I am just adding to it, going in a different direction. But first I'm going to show you how to use it with a chalk pen, which I actually found was a lot easier than my original way that I had filmed it. And then I'm going to show you how to use it by putting creases in it and the weird little technique that I use to do that. So the first part with the chalk pen, you will see that there are already quilting on it going one direction. We are doing it in the other direction. So I just kind of wanted to tell you what was going on. And so let's get to it. What we're going to need for this technique is a long ruler and a marking pen. The one I actually bought is by Clover, and this is a chalk pen. I bought the white one, but after using it and working with it on on this part of it, you can't see it very well on the white. So I probably would recommend a different color if you are dealing with white fabric. Chalk pen is great because it does erase, or you can just brush it off. And as I sewed over it on my fabric, it actually kind of erased it as I went. So you don't even see it. Just be careful. The ones that iron on or iron away the markings, sometimes you still will get them back on your quilt. Okay, so what we're just going to do is we're going to line up our ruler, and it's going to go corner to corner. And again, this is the white. It's not great, but we're just going to draw that line from corner to corner. Okay, if we move over to the orange, you're going to be able to see this better. And I want to make sure that it goes right through that corner and this corner. And if I have to, sometimes I move my ruler in the middle because I want to make sure that it's going corner to corner and right through all those intersections. So here you can see, let me get you closer. Here you can see where that chalk pencil comes through. And then we're going to line this one up, and it's going to go corner to corner as well. And we're just putting a little chalk line on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on my sewing machine and run my seam right down that line all the way across. As you can see, I have my seams already going this direction here. And so those ones are all done. And now I'm going to do them in the opposite direction. What I'm going to do is mark this whole quilt or a partial part of the quilt, take it to the sewing machine, sew it up, and then I'm going to come back and mark it again. Now, one of the things I want to talk to you about is when you're doing it, it's better to start with a longer seam and then go towards the edge. That just helps you to make sure you don't get any weird wrinkles. And, oops, my ruler moved on me. Any weird wrinkles, and it's going to be nice and straight. Oh, I already did that one. Okay, so now that I have a couple rows marked, I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew it up. Okay, let's talk about settings on our machine. This is my default setting. So 0, is my straight stitch, 3.5 is where my needle is, and 2.2 is my stitch length. Now what I first want to do is, because I'm using this kind of foot, I want to make sure that my needle is in the middle, and it is not. So I always have to move it over a little bit. And because I'm quilting and not just piecing my quilt together, I'm going to actually change this to 4.5 to 5. And what that's going to do is lengthen my stitch length out, and it's going to make my stitches look a lot prettier on my quilt. Okay, what I have here is my cutting mat, my quilt sandwich, okay, and a super long ruler. As you can see, I have put my pins in this. It is all ready to go. What I'm going to use to mark this is a rotary cutter that I took the blade off of. And I'm just going to use that edge because it makes it super nice to make a crease in my fabric. What I'm going to actually do to quilt this is I'm going to run diagonal lines both this way and this way. I am just going to start by making the lines going this direction, and then I will sew it and then come back and mark the lines going the other direction. So let me show you how I'm going to do this. I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to put it through the corners, every corner along this way. And so I'm going to line up my ruler here and over here, and this is going to be a seam that I'm going to make. Then I'm going to take my rotary cutter that has no blade in it and run it right along the edge of that quilt. And if you look, you can then see that I have this crease that goes right down it. Okay, and I'm going to then sew right along that crease. Now, you have a couple options. You can do the whole quilt at one time, or you can start with just a couple of rows. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple rows, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew on my first creases. Now, when we go to sew this, I actually want you to start at a longer piece. You don't have to do the middle, but it's better if you start at a more longer piece that goes a lot of the ways across your quilt. And the reason we want to do that is because that'll put that middle right in the right spot, and then we can work our way out. We want to start in the middle, work our way out. And as we sew the seam, see this pin? It's right here in the way. We're going to get to this point, take the pin out, and then just keep going. Your other option is that when you're here putting markings on your quilt, you can just go ahead and move it to the side so that it is not in your way when you go to actually sew the quilt. And I should have thought about this when I had you guys put together your quilt sandwich, that we are going to be going on the diagonal and we don't need our pins in the way. And so I'm going to mark a couple of rows, and then I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and sew a couple rows, and then I'm going to bring it back and do it like that, just back and forth. If you want to mark it all at one time, you're obviously welcome to do that. But if you would rather do it in pieces, you are obviously welcome to do that as well. So get your quilt marked up. If you want, there are a few options for pins that work. I just like to put this crease in it though, because it just allows me to sew right along that crease. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I can mark it with my old rotary cutter and just take it over to the sewing machine. We do know that this is really big sometimes to put into our sewing machine. So what I'm going to do is roll up this corner, because this is the corner that I'm putting in my sewing machine. Okay, this is the one that I started marking my crease on, and I'm going to put that right there and drop my foot so that the crease that I put on there for my sew line goes right down the middle of my foot. I'm then going to drop my needle, and I want to make sure that I'm dropping my needle off of the quilt top, because I want it to make sure that I get that quilt top edge. Okay, and then I'm just going to sew, and I'm going to sew right along that crease that I just put on it. Now, depending on your backing, you might need to give it a little help, because this quilt sandwich can get kind of thick and it might have a hard time going through your sewing machine. So as I sew, I'm going to make sure that this side in here stays rolled up and that I follow right along that crease. When I get to the end, I want to go past the edge of my quilt's top, pull up my needle, whoops, pick up my foot and trim those threads off. Now what I'm going to actually do is go to the right and go towards the corner of my quilt. I just want to make sure that it's lying flat and that I'm not going to get any puckers. And I've actually done my crease right down this next section. So I'm going to do this so that I go all the way to the corner of my quilt. Now that we have our quilting going one direction and the other direction, it is time to trim up our quilt. What we want to do is trim off all this excess that goes along the edges, and then our quilt will be ready to bind. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to take my straight edge ruler and put it right along that edge and take my rotary cutter and just trim off all that excess. Make sure that you trim off the bottom. I'm going to have a lot of fuzzies because I do have minky on the back of mine, but we are just going to use our straight edge ruler and go all the way around the quilt and trim off all that excess. I don't have any need for it, so I will just be tossing it into the trash. Now if I turn my quilt around and to the point where I have this extra, I might hold on to this in case there's something else I can use it on. My minky, I know there's a pattern out there to make an infinity scarf from minky, which might be fun, so I might hold on to that. Or you know what else would be fun is if you topped your stockings, Christmas stockings, with minky. So that would be fun too. So if you want to, you are welcome to hold on to leftover fabric, but I'm just going to trim mine all the way around and throw most of it away. After trimming that minky up, I've got fuzzies all over me. I guess that's one of the casualties of working with minky or sewing. Okay, so we have our quilt all done. We have the top done. We have our quilt sandwich done. We have our quilting all done. And now all we need to do is do that final edge. It's time for binding. Next week, we're going to talk binding. Our quilt, assuming that you are doing it the same size as mine, is 48 by 48 inches, which is almost enough for us to be able to do one strip per side, but it's not quite. So you need 12.5 inches of yardage, or 3/8 of a yard. Yes, 3/8 of a yard for your binding. Find something fun, and I will show you how to turn it into a binding next week. I'm going to pick something from this fabric line. There's actually some stripes still at my local quilt store. I love to put stripes along the edges of my quilts. This one I didn't because I have a scrappy border, but most of the time I like to put stripes on the edges of my quilt. It's just so much fun. So I'm going to go grab some of that from my local quilt store. If you have any questions about anything we've gone over this week or in the past, make sure you leave them down in the comments section below. Find me on Instagram at Ashley_SunnyMade, and I will see you next week. Happy sewing!